and as usual, John says, "Good morning, sir." And the man says, "Darn it, here," goes into his pocket, gives him a 20. You see, the man did something negative, and then John did something positive. Always respond with love. Never play into madness. Love always wins a person's heart. And then John says, "I'm old, smart, and good looking." That's an expression he likes to use a lot. So after that, John and I came to meet regularly. I would come one day out of the week and sit down next to him, and then we'd just talk for hours. And John told me wonderful stories about all the people on Connecticut Avenue. He told me about Susie, who works in the gift shop next to him called Wake Up Little Susie. So, whenever John's eating food that has crumbs, he likes to spread it out in front of him so the birds can come down and eat it. And then Susie gets mad because she's afraid of birds. There used to be a crow that would land on the newsstand next to him so he could feed it, and people passing by would stop to take pictures of John and the crow. And then he had to stop because Susie got mad. But here's another story about Susie. One day, there's another person on the street. Maybe he's drunk, and he causes a ruckus. And there are policemen everywhere, and some of them might be expecting John of being the man. So, that whole day, Susie makes John sit inside her gift shop so that he won't get in trouble. And another time, a policeman walks up to John, but it's his friend this time, so he just wants to greet him and have a conversation. But Miss Susie thinks John is in trouble. So, she leaves her shop, she walks outside and she says, "Sir, John is a gentleman who has never done anything wrong, and all of us here on the street are completely fine with him." It's so nice to see how many friends John has made in 10 years. Friends who would greet him when they saw him. Friends who would stand up for him if they thought he was in trouble. John tells me about Miss Nancy from down the street. At the beginning of the 10 years when he first became homeless, John used to sleep in a box in the cold before he went to the shelter, in the space behind that where he panhandles before they boarded it up to build a restaurant. And one day, this woman passing by sticks her hand under the box with a very large bill. And John is so moved by it, he crawls out from under the box and looks up just so he can see her face. And every Tuesday, Miss Nancy sends her housekeeper down with a 20 for John. Miss Nancy is very wealthy, and John always mentions how she used her money to build a hospital in India. John points to a man who's passing down the street and he calls out, "Hey, my friend," and the man calls, "Oh, my friend." And then John points to his shoes and says, "He gave me these." Another day, it's raining hard, and John is out there panhandling. And then a man comes up and gives John $100 bills, $100, and says, "John, take this money and go home now. Get out of this rain." And John is also very conscious about his manners. He always wants to be polite and treat people well when he's panhandling. He describes the person he never wants to be as the person who walks up to you with alcohol on their breath, holding out a cup saying, "Got a dollar? Got a dollar?" John makes himself look clean. He smiles and he says, "Spare any change, sir? Ma'am?" John says, "You should always treat others with good energy. Because if we all treated each other with good energy, we would all naturally become better at returning good energy." And then, "I'm old, smart, and good looking." And whenever I was sitting here on Connecticut Avenue with John, I would always see something that brought a smile to my face. Two little girls walk up to John with smiles on their faces, holding out a dollar bill. A woman walks into the restaurant and comes out having bought John lunch. A boy who works in the restaurant comes out on a hot summer day with a frozen Coke and says, "Hey John, you want a soda?" And he shakes his hand and gives it to him. We're at the nearby pizza shop, getting John's favorite pepperoni slice. And as he's holding out his dollar across the counter, the woman says, "No, John, it's okay." There was always such kindness, such compassion on this street, on Connecticut Avenue. Compassion in action. It's the most beautiful thing to watch. And then, something extraordinary happened. Oftentimes, when I would visit John, he would mention how earlier that day or earlier that week, he had gone to another place in DC to check his name on a waiting list. This waiting list was for an apartment called an efficiency. It would be partly paid for by the government because the recipient would be a senior citizen veteran. And every time John would check, his name would just go up a little bit on this very large list. And one time his name got to the top, but he didn't check it for a while, so they put him back at the bottom. So one day, I come to visit John as usual. We shake hands and talk a little, and then he says, "I got the place." And I just couldn't believe it. It was wonderful news. When John was first notified, he needed an initial down payment of $200 to accept the apartment. John had fallen short that week. But when Miss Nancy found out, she went straight to the ATM, got $200, and gave it to him, just like that. And in the next couple months, this whole process started where everyone on Connecticut Avenue rallied around John. John initially had no money to buy furniture, so he started out sleeping on the floor of his apartment. And then a man donated a few unused chairs and a small television. I remember when I would visit him, sometimes people walking by would stop and mention a piece of furniture they weren't using. And one day, as we're preparing to go home, John takes out his coins to count how much change he'd collected. But something new was there. A set of keys. And John looks at me and says, "It's been a long time since I've had keys." A friend of John's, named Pat, went into a lot of the buildings and put up these posters that said, "Hey everybody, John got an apartment. Let's help out." And then, sometimes we'd get up from our usual place and take a walk. And when we'd come back, there would be pillows left sitting on his crates. People would send their sons to John's apartment to hang up pictures, to carry a table. One day, his friend, a college student, picks him up early to pick up some unused furniture. And then one day, Susie comes out and says, "Hey John, Miss Nancy just called about a bed." John prides himself on being this tough survivor. He likes to mention how, at the beginning of those 10 years, he started out sleeping in a box in the cold before he went